Thanks, team, for leading us so well. Love that prayer. I love the fact that we get to speak Jesus over our circumstances in our world. Hey, I'm so glad you're here today, and I hope you have time to stick around after service for our block party. Apparently, hot dogs are getting some bad press, so I think they're a huge hit. And if there's any left over, we'll just deliver them to the Brown House, because it sounds like they're a hit there. So that'll go there. So if you're wondering if it's ever a meal train, I mean, that feels like that'd be the right thing to do, right? Yeah. Brace yourself, Brown. Hey, if you love parties, we actually have another party coming up the first week of October. It's our 100-year anniversary as a church, and we're going to throw a big old party for that too. In 1916, there were 7 people who gathered, and they prayed for 5 years about starting a church. And in 1921, that church was started, and it was called the Alliance Tabernacle. This month, you're going to get some glimpses of the story of who we are, what makes us who we are today. And when it comes to the 100-year anniversary, we got a whole party plan. We've got you're going to have some history in the lobby. You'll have a chance to see a little booklet to take with you that to tell you a little bit more about who we are. But in the weeks leading up to our 100-year anniversary, we thought it'd be great just to share some videos with you of those who have served in this place. We had a story from John Stumbo who served here. Just sharing some memories. Morris Dirks has shared some memories with us, and Dee Bubna. Dee and Don served here. They came here in 1964 and served here for 23 years. The longest any time had ever served as a pastor here at Salem Alliance up to that point was 3 years. And they served for 23 years, and Dawn went to glory in 2011, and Dee was here last night, our Saturday night service, and man, what a blessing to hear from her. Enjoy this video as you just kind of hear a little bit of the story of Salem Alliance through her eyes.
My name is Dolores Bubna, and most people call me Dee, all right, Bubna. And my husband and I were pastoring here for 23 years. First time a pastor ever stayed more than 3 years here. We rode up here in a station wagon with 3 little kids and a dog in order to start the church, being pastor of the church up here. The wonderful way we were greeted when we got here was so special, especially neighbors right next door to us. Her name was Leota Degg, and she was so good to me during that time, and our children became good friends, and we loved them very much. But they made us feel at home. When I think of the legacy of Salem Alliance Church, I think of one that became familiar to me in the very beginning, that the importance of all of this was faith and unity, love and unity. And that has stuck with me all these years, and that's what I've always wanted for this place. Love and unity. We were having people tell us what they needed us to pray for that night at prayer meeting. And of course, it was the usual things. They began about whether they liked the music or not, and they wanted some changes there. And it was just a very big variety right that. And so Don didn't say a word. He walked up to the blackboard and he said, well, here's going to be our primary emphasis on this prayer meeting tonight, and I want you to look at it. And he just wrote up here, here's what we're going to pray for. And he wrote love and unity at the top of the blackboard. And somebody spoke up and said, I've never thought about that. And he said, you will see, that's what we're going to need. I remember when a gentleman came to us just not long after we came here. And he said, and Don asked him, he said, would you help me a minute? He said, tell me, how do you think people are taking me being here now? What do you think they're thinking about it? And this fellow looked at Don and he says, They believe that you love them, and they're going to follow you. He said, well, have you ever told the people that you love them? And Don said, well, they know that. And he said, but maybe you need to say that to them. So Don stood up the next Sunday, and one of the first things he did right before he first started, he said, I want to tell you something. Have I told you yet I love you? And just said that before he went ahead to preach. And it just got real quiet in there when that was. He says, you can wake up now, I'm going to preach. Well, that set the path for the whole direction that we saw we had to go. Very definitely. We had to let people know how much we loved them. From then on, that was when the word love got to going around more. Well, you know, I think something that is to Salem Alliance's great credit, too. I have 2 daughters that still attend here. They love Salem Alliance. Happy 100th year celebration, Salem Alliance Church. You're my church.
It's been a special privilege to be able to sit in on these conversations and just hear the stories and the memories. And I love what Dee has shared, and I love how Don and Dee have shaped this place. And you'll get to hear more of the stories as we anticipate our 100-year celebration the first week of October. So I know you'll enjoy that. Hey, we wrapped up a series last week called Imago Jesus, and our Family Gathers series. I apologize, there's no fruit snacks today. That's a once-a-year thing. But Efren did such a great job wrapping up that series, talking about how Jesus, he comes to us in our place of shame, and how he not only restores us, but then he recommissions us. Man, doesn't that just provide significant hope for us? For those of us who feel like we've blown it, we're failures, we've disqualified ourselves. That Efren did such a great job helping us understand the heart of God. Well, in this month, we're starting a new series. It's just a short series, 3 weeks. We're calling it the Jesus Stuff, and I know right away you are so impressed by the sophistication of the title. But let me explain this a little bit, because we're just talking about the stuff Jesus did. And we're doing this because Luke chapter 6, verse 40 says these words. It says that the student is not greater than the teacher. And the student who is fully trained, however, will become like the teacher. One of Jesus' disciples, John, said this in 1 John. Those who say they live in God should live their lives as Jesus did. There's this expectation for those of us who do follow Jesus that we would begin to look like him. And you probably know this quite well, that just doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen by accident. You don't wake up in the morning and go, wow, I'm just like Jesus. I'll try that. Send that to Serena sometime. I'm sure it won't go very well. It takes formation. It takes time. It takes the Spirit's work in us. And this is why Paul will write to one of his churches, and he'll say, I'm agonizing as if I were in childbirth, that Christ might be formed in you. That Jesus might take shape in you, and that you and we might be transformed into the likeness of Jesus. So we're going to be talking about the Jesus stuff, the kind of stuff that Jesus honed in on, the kind of things that he gave his attention to. We're going to be talking about his mercy, his miracles, and his message in this month. And we're going to begin today talking about his mercy. Now, years ago, there was a young woman. She was 15 years old, got her driver's license. She got her driver's license in the state of Maine. That's why you can get it at age 15. And she's driving a car. She's 15 and a half, driving in rural southern Maine. It's in the middle of a Saturday night. It's in the middle of nowhere, pre-cell phones. And she's driving along, and there's this loud sound, and she hears feels the vibration in her car. Her tire has burst, and she has a flat tire. She pulls over the side of the highway. Now, immediately she remembers that she was in driver's ed, and there was a course. The part of the course was how to change a flat tire. But when that part of the course was being explained, she told herself she didn't need to pay attention because she had a rather new car, and this wouldn't happen to her. But lo and behold, she's in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of the night, and she is stranded. As she's standing on the highway, looking at her flat tire, scratching her head, wondering how in the world is this all going to be resolved, again, pre-cell phones, she hears the sound of a vehicle approaching. And as she looks down the highway, she sees the lights of a car. They're coming. Actually, it's a truck. And as it comes closer, she can see that it's slowing down. It is pulling over to the side of the highway, the side of the road. And it's driving very slowly on the shoulder up right behind where her car is. And as the car pulls up, she looks at this truck and realizes, I don't recognize this truck. And the ignition gets turned off. No one gets out of the truck immediately, and she can tell that her pulse is escalating. Anxiety is beginning to rise quite quickly, and she feels in danger. She's 15 and a half. She's a young woman in the middle of nowhere, and a large truck is pulled up behind her, and finally the driver's door opens, and a man gets out, shuts his driver's door, and walks ever so slowly up to where she is. He pauses, and he says, "Ma'am, I'd like to help you fix your flat tire." Huge sigh of relief. Trunk is opened. Spare tire is retrieved. Jack, tire iron. The man jacks up the car, changes the flat tire, puts the burst out tire in her trunk, hardly says a word, and goes back into his truck and drives away. And I share the story to simply make this point. The kind of person who rescues you matters. Right? Because you can be rescued by someone and feel like that you are carrying shame. You can be rescued by someone who says, "What were you thinking?" But the kind of person who rescues you matters. And as we talk about the Jesus stuff and we talk about our rescuer, Jesus, can we just remind ourselves that Jesus is one of the most kind people you will ever meet. He's so generous and hospitable, and he's attentive, and he's affectionate. He's open-handed. Jesus, when I imagine him looking at us, he smiles. He's endearing. He's profound word. He's nice. He's kind. Jesus, our rescuer, is so big-hearted and soft-hearted and tender-hearted, and the kind of person who rescues you and I matters so deeply. And in fact, as you begin to look at the life of Jesus in the Gospels, here's what you see over and over again. You see the kindness and the mercy and the compassion of Jesus just seeping from him towards those he encounters. We're just going to throw a bunch on the screen. You get a chance to just see this. John chapter 4, Jesus encountered a nobleman whose son was dying, and moved by compassion, he healed him. Matthew chapter 14, Jesus, moved by compassion, healed people of their sicknesses and fed the 5,000. Mark chapter 1, Jesus passed through Capernaum and encountered a leper, and moved by compassion, he cleansed him. Matthew chapter 15, Jesus had compassion for a crowd of 4,000 and fed them because they had not eaten in 3 days. And still yet again, Matthew chapter 12, Jesus, moved by compassion, delivered a man from demons. And still yet again, Luke chapter 7, Jesus saw a widow burying her only son, and Jesus, moved by compassion, resurrected him. Friends, our Jesus is so attentive and so caring and kind and so cares about us, and he's so big-hearted and soft-hearted and tender-hearted, and the kind of person who rescues you and us matters. And our Jesus is overflowing with mercy and compassion. The English language really struggles to capture the multiple dimensions of this compassion and mercy. But the language in which the scriptures were written is very clear on this. There's multiple words that are translated into the English language, that the word mercy or compassion. One of the original language words, the Greek words, is this word that describes the emotion that comes on you when you see someone's circumstances or you hear about something. Trina was on a flight recently. She's coming back from watching grandkids. She makes a connection in Minneapolis. She's sitting on her plane, and as people are coming onto the plane, she realizes that there is a family coming onto the plane, a large family. It's a refugee family. And as they're coming onto the plane, it dawns on her that no, this is not just any ordinary refugee family. This is a family that has fled Afghanistan. A mom and a dad and 8 children. She's starting to count, and she sees that they have their belongings placed in a cloth, and the top of the cloth is just tied in a knot to hold them. No suitcases, no carry-ons, just sheets with their belongings in them. Their children, when they're being evacuated from Kabul, one day after the bombing, if you were watching the news, one day after the bombing, when servicemen and women lost their lives and Afghanis lost their lives, this family was there. They saw that, heard about that. The trauma that they were experiencing, the kids layering up clothing just so they can take as much with them as possible. They're getting on the plane, and it dawns on Trina as she's counting how many people are part of this family that there's 10. We've been talking about a family of 10 coming to Salem. And it hits her. This is that family. They've been evacuated, and they're coming to Salem, and the emotion hits her, and her eyes begin to fill up with tears, and the compassion and mercy captures her. It's an emotion. It's an emotion that's not connected to an action. That's not a bad thing. It's just you see someone's circumstances, and it just moves you. And the team, our Salem for Refugees team, was there to meet him at the airport. And by the way, the dad said, I wondered when I came to America if the Americans would really want me. And when he saw the Salem for Refugees crew welcoming his family, it brought peace to him. That's one form of compassion. Another form of compassion or mercy is you have no idea what the story is, so there's no emotion connected to the kindness, but there's a benevolent action that you engage in. It's like maybe you gave to Salem Alliance to help care for families like this. That's another word that describes mercy. Or maybe last year when the fires were raging in Oregon that you gave to the Fire Response Fund because you wanted to care for people who lost their homes and their belongings. That's mercy and compassion. The tears didn't well up in your eyes. You didn't know the stories, but you wanted to get engaged. You wanted to show compassion. Or maybe you gave our Easter offering in 2020 that went to help people who, during COVID, they couldn't go to work. The restaurant was closed. Their gym was closed down, and so their income was impacted, and you gave. It's action devoid of emotion. Not a bad thing. That's mercy. It's compassion. Or on the other side, it's emotion without action. It's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But those two scenarios are not what's happening here in Luke chapter 7. I'm going to look at the story in Luke chapter 7, the story of the widow of Nain. When Jesus is moved by compassion, it's actually a different word used in the original language, which means to get all twisted up inside. It's this gut-wrenching moment when you see someone's circumstance, you hear their story, the tears well up in your eyes, and you just can't help yourself but get involved. You have to do something. It's a Greek word. It's called splagnizomai. Big word. You don't have to remember it. The way I remember it is I just remember the word splag. S-P-L-A-G, splag. Jesus gets splagged over and over and over again. And the kind of person who rescues you matters. And our rescuer, our Jesus, is so big-hearted, so soft-hearted, so tender-hearted. I wonder if we know this Jesus. This is our rescuer. Let me read the text. Luke chapter 7. Again, the story of the widow from the village of Nain. One of the ones that I highlighted as we were just noticing Jesus' compassion. Luke 7, verse 11. Soon afterwards, Jesus went with his disciples to the village of Nain. And a large crowd followed him. A funeral procession was coming out as he approached the village gate. The young man who had died was a widow's only son. And a large crowd from the village was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. There it is, splagnizomai. He got splagged. Don't cry, he said. And he walked over to the coffin and touched it, and the bearers stopped. Young man, he said, I tell you, get up. And then the dead boy sat up and began to talk. Wouldn't you like to be at a funeral like that one? And Jesus gave him back to his mother. Great fear swept the crowd. I get that. And they praised God, saying, "A mighty prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people today." And the news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding countryside. Because the kind of person who rescues you matters. Jesus is big-hearted and soft-hearted and tender-hearted. I wonder if we know this Jesus. Jesus is in a procession of his own. We're going to have a collision here in Luke chapter 7. We got the procession of Jesus, and then we've got a funeral procession, and it's going to be a head-on collision. A head-on collision of two processions. Jesus has been in Capernaum. That's the beginning of Luke chapter 7, and he's making his way to the village of Nain. This is the only time in the scriptures we hear about the village of Nain. Let me throw a map on the screen. This is the Sea of Galilee. You'll see Capernaum at the top of the very top there of the Sea of Galilee. You go all the way down to the bottom of the map. It's on the screen, and you'll see Nain. It's about 25 miles. It's on a main thoroughfare pathway to go to Jerusalem. You would go by the village of Nain, and Jesus is likely, because it's 25 miles, it's been a day's journey. And so he's coming to the village, and he's coming to rest in the village for the evening as he continues on in his preaching of the kingdom of God. As he comes, he encounters a funeral procession. Now, let's talk about this, because funerals in those days were quite different than funerals in our day. It's a sad day, but this is a sad, sad day. You see, when someone passed away in the Middle East, they were often buried that very same day because of the heat, the climate. And so the body would be wrapped up in a sheet, and it would be placed on what would be, it's called a funeral bier. Think of like a stretcher. Here's a picture from years ago in Palestine of a funeral procession, a body being carried on a stretcher-like funeral bier. What's missing in this picture is the crowds. Because what would have happened in that day and age is there's no obituary to be printed into a newspaper. There's no invitations or phone calls to be made to invite you to a memorial service. No, in this case, what's happening is the person who has experienced loss will hire professional mourners. Not because they want to fake their sorrow, but because when they go into the street, they want to loudly cry so that others in the village will know that someone has passed. And it was culturally appropriate that when you heard professional mourners wailing, that you would join the funeral procession. And so you have this funeral procession. Again, it's a sad day. All funerals are sad, but this is a sad, sad day. It's sad because we have a woman who is a widow. This has already happened to her. She's buried her husband, and now she is going to bury her only son. And it just happened. She hasn't had time to process her loss. She's just trying to put one foot in front of the other in her grief and make her way to this burial of her son. And for her, this is a significant loss of family. There's no legacy to be carried on, no family name. And more pragmatically, there's a loss of provision. There's no husband to provide. There's no son to provide. There's no Social Security. There's no food stamps. She's entering into a season of great destitution. Her only probably hope will be that she will just be a beggar and people will give to her. And this is the widow. This is the funeral that's taking place. And she's coming out, and the collision is about to take place. And Jesus is coming with the crowd, and they're excited because there's been healings and there's been great teaching, and they love being around Jesus. And Jesus sees this funeral, and he gets all twisted up inside. Splagged. You ever been there? Seen someone's circumstances and gone, oh my goodness. The tears fill your eyes, and you think to yourself, I've got to do something. Friends, I think that perhaps all the charities and ministries are catalyzed in moments like this. And around the year 2000 here at Salem Alliance, someone noticed that the poor in our city couldn't afford to heat their home in the winter. And so the Royal Order of Red Suspenders was birthed. Roars. And people went around chopping wood, and then when phone calls would come in, they would go deliver cords of wood to the poor in our city so they could have a warm house during the cold season. There was also of those who went around the Edgewater district in West Salem and began interviewing and surveying neighbors and saying, hey, what's the greatest need in your neighborhood? And they said, we just don't have any health care, and there are people who are sick and they have nowhere to go. There's no doctors that will care for them. And Salem Free Clinics has this genesis in those surveys, those questions that were asked, because someone got all twisted up inside and said, I can't take it. Someone's got to do something. The Furniture Bank, stories like women coming out of domestic violence situations and being given a home or an apartment placed in it, but there's no furniture, and children are sleeping on the floor, and mom is sleeping on the floor, no pillows, no mattresses, no couches, no dinner tables, no dressers, and someone saw it, and they got all twisted up inside because it just can't happen. And they got splagged. And this is what Jesus is feeling as he sees this woman. And so we see the heart of Jesus, big-hearted, soft-hearted, tender-hearted. And he walks over to the woman, and now we're going to see the power of Jesus. He walks over to the woman and says, don't cry. Had to be startling words. Don't cry. And then he goes and he touches the stretcher with the body. We quickly would move past that statement as we read our Bibles, but a Jew reading this in that day would go, hold on a second. Because what Jesus has just done is he's violated the ritual purity laws. If you're clean, ritually, you don't touch what is unclean. And a dead body is unclean. And if you touch what is unclean, that uncleanness gets transferred to you. Remember cooties in elementary school? That was the law. If you're clean, you avoid all that is unclean. But Jesus crosses that line, and friends, he turns it upside down. Because in the past, it's been, if you're clean and you touch something that's unclean, that defiles you. That uncleanness comes upon you. But when Jesus touches, his cleanness actually, he's not defiled by it. Actually, his purity, his holiness actually remedies the situation, and that person becomes clean. This is why when he touches someone who is sick, they become well. This is why when he touches someone who's demonized, they become set free. This is why when Jesus touches someone who is dead, they come alive. Jesus turns it all around, and the character and the type of person who rescues you is so important. It matters, and this is your Jesus. I wonder, do you know him? He's so kind, so attentive, affectionate. This is your Jesus. And Jesus touches and he says, I say to you, little boy, get up. Wouldn't you have loved to have been there? And the boy sits up and starts talking, and we read that he's given back to his mother, and his mother, her circumstances have changed because of the touch of Jesus. She goes from grief to joy. She now goes from being alone and isolated to having family, from destitution to hope, all because someone got all twisted up inside. And the heart and the power of Jesus combined to radically display the love of Christ. In the early 1970s, there were Christians who became quite concerned about the moral trajectory of our nation. They began talking about creating a social agenda to address this decline in our nation and to take a stand and say this can't be anymore. And in the late 1970s, this social gathering of conservative Christians began to be launched, and a new society was formed. It was called the Moral Majority. It was led by a prominent Baptist minister. His name was Jerry Falwell. And Falwell and Pat Robertson and what would become more than 2 million members of the Moral Majority would, as people look back on it, say that actually this gathering helped get President Reagan elected to the Oval Office in 1980. And if you've read anything about the moral majority, I believe actually that the motives were good. They wanted to reverse the moral decline in our nation. But as they began to articulate what they were up to, they, in sort of manifesto fashion, articulate what that would be. And Falwell will write that they will combat. Notice the language. They will combat amoral liberals, drug abusers, the coddling of criminals, homosexual, communists, and pro-choice abortionists. And I can't help but wonder as I look at the stuff that Jesus was a part of, and I think about Luke chapter 6, verse 40, in which the student is not greater than the teacher, and that the student who is properly trained looks like the teacher. And as I think about the ministry and how Jesus moved, I have to ask myself the question, I wonder what would have happened in the late 1970s if a moral majority was not launched, but actually a mercy majority. What would have happened in our nation if, in fact, grace was shown to, as the words from the manifesto say, grace was shown to amoral liberals? What would have happened if kindness was extended to those who were abusing drugs? What would our nation look like if felons and criminals, people who made mistakes, actually were shown compassion? What would it look like if instead of combating, but there had been discourse and understanding between us and the gay community? What would it look like instead of fighting, combating pro-choice abortionists if there might have actually been kindness extended to those who have engaged in abortions? What would have happened? And I don't know if even if as I ask the question, there's this internal tension that takes place in me. Maybe it doesn't happen to you, but there's something in me that says, well, hold on a second. That stuff's not right. So it's got to change. So someone's got to take a stand. Someone's got to have the courage and face it and say we can't have this. And there's this tension. And if we show mercy rather than standing up, aren't we condoning it? Aren't we complicit? Friends, isn't that the same type of question that the Pharisees asked Jesus? Why do you let that prostitute touch you? Why are you spending time with tax collectors? Why do you have dinner with scum and notorious sinners? Why are you healing on the Sabbath? Could I be so bold as to say that the moral majority that was launched in 1979 was not new? That was happening in Jesus' day. And as Jesus came and he sought to transform his nation, as he sought to transform the Jewish people who would then go out into all the world, his lead was not correcting people's behavior. His lead was actually being all gut-wrenched and turned around in the side, and being moved by compassion, he heals a leper. Being moved by compassion, he heals an old man's son. Being moved by compassion, he raises a widow's son back to life. It's the same time as I go, hold on a second. Aren't we supposed to be holy? Aren't we supposed to be righteous? Doesn't God care about that? Of course he does. That's actually why he sent his son. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21 says this, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. God longs for people to be made holy and longs for them to be made right, to be righteous. The scriptures say, be holy as I am holy, recording God. Holiness and righteousness is very important to God. But the fact of the matter is that Jesus led with compassion and mercy. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus will say, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus' brother James would write, mercy triumphs over judgment. Paul, writing to a church in Colossae, will mash holiness and mercy. Since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, there's holiness, you must clothe yourselves. You would expect to hear purity, righteousness, morals. And Paul says, no, I want you to clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. But wait a minute, if I lead with if I'm big-hearted, if I'm soft-hearted, if I'm tender-hearted, then it's going to seem like nothing is going to change and things are going to keep going the direction I don't want them to go. Friends, that is not the testimony of Scripture. Isn't this why Mary Magdalene became a follower of Jesus? is he experienced the mercy and compassion of Jesus. Isn't this why Matthew left his tax collector booth? Is this not why Zacchaeus gave back 4 times of what he stole from his own neighbors? Because people encountered the kindness of Jesus, and the kind of person who rescues you matters. And when you experience that kind of rescue, you actually recalibrate yourself. You actually realign yourself with the way of Jesus. And this is the stuff that Jesus gave himself to. I wonder, do we know this Jesus? Is this the Jesus we know? And again, the question that I asked, put up on the screen, what would America look like today if instead of birthing a moral majority in 1979, a mercy majority was launched? I wonder what our relationship with the gay community would be like. I wonder what our relationship would be like with those who are pro-choice. I wonder how people would feel who spent time in prison I wonder what they feel about the church. I wonder. And can I just say to you, it's not too late. You're doing it. You are doing it. And it's making a difference because it's the Jesus stuff. It's what he gave his life to. And the kind of person who rescues you matters. May I ask a couple questions in wrapping up? First question is this. What's the first word you use to describe God? It's really important. I remember I was in my ordination interview, which as a pastor is kind of a big deal. That's when you get your title reverend that I never used because you're probably more reverend than I am. I hear amen from the front row. That's my wife. They asked the question, describe God. I got stumped. I had all this information in my head. I packed a lot in there, and I didn't know what they were looking for. And so in a moment of desperation, I just responded and said, he's big? And they chuckled and laughed. And how would you describe God? What's the first word you would use? Do you know that God actually describes himself to us? Time and time again, he described himself to Moses. Moses said, I want to see your glory. God puts him in a cleft of a rock. In Exodus chapter 34, captures God describing himself to Moses. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. I don't think God is ever haphazard in the words that he chooses. And I find it utterly pleasantly astounding that his lead is compassion and grace, slow to anger. Oh, my friends, I feel like there's a famine of mercy in our day. Is this the God you know? Do you know this Jesus? Because the kind of person who rescues you matters. Second question I have for you is simply this. What's the first word people use to describe you? What's the first word they use to describe me? You probably got this nailed, but I got work to do. I have work to do. What would happen if a group of people got about the Jesus stuff and said, I want to be formed into the image of Christ. I want to represent him well. And mercy and compassion seems to be so important to Jesus. So fill me, Lord. Fill me. What would your neighborhood look like? Family. Your workplace? Our city? I think it would look like a lot of the stories you read about Jesus. And those stories are being written, those stories are being told. And the fact of the matter is there's some of you in the room today that you need this touch of Jesus. You need mercy. So in fact, right now, I'm going to invite you to stand. If you need mercy and compassion right now, you're like that woman who's burying her son. There's great sadness you're dealing with, or perhaps it's your kids have gone sideways, or you have a health issue. You stand right now. Those of you who need this big-hearted, soft-hearted, tender-hearted touch of Jesus. I just want to pray a release of mercy over you this morning. the kind of mercy and compassion that we've been reading about. I'm just asking the Father to release his heart toward you. I don't know all your circumstances, but Jesus does, because there's a collision taking place. He wants you to know he sees you. And those of you who are remaining seated, you can just stretch out a hand. You might know someone who's standing and you just want to say, Lord, would you just pour out your compassion on them? House churches, same thing. You're standing. Those in the house church can just stretch out hands. Father, the God who is gracious and compassionate and slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. These dear ones who are standing in the room today need your touch, your compassionate touch, the kind of compassion that gets you all twisted up inside and causes you to intervene. These dear ones need this today. Oh, Lord, would you open the windows of heaven and pour out your compassion on them? Would you speak words to them? Would you call scripture to mind for them? Would you cause pictures to arise in their mind? Would you cause a song to be rising right now in their spirit, Lord? Oh, Jesus, have mercy. Jesus, have mercy. Lord, our hearts break for these dear ones. We don't know their stories, yet there's something within us. If we look around and see them standing, it says, oh, Jesus, would you come now and make a deposit and take action, just like you did in Luke chapter 7 with this widow. Take action that would produce awe and worship. We ask this because we know you care. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.